Hey everyone, it's Scrubby, and today we're going to be doing another one of these scary story videos that you guys seem to love quite a bit. I'm going to be doing more of these like once or twice a week now, so if you like them, subscribe, and without further ado, let's get into it. My dad had recently bought a new vacation house on a lake upstate. He invited me to come stay for the weekend. God knows that I needed it after the breakup. It really took all my motivation to keep going. A weekend away would definitely do some good to my head, my therapist had told me, but what did she know? As long as I stayed miserable and kept coming back and my hard-earned paychecks kept filling her pockets, she probably didn't care. But maybe she was right and this getaway was exactly what I needed. I watched as the clock struck 5 p.m. and I was out of there. I left my cubicle behind and headed to the car. I knew I had a long drive ahead of me and I figured that I'd get there sometime after midnight. Knowing my dad, he'd still be up by the time I got there with a glass of wine. So I started the drive, watching as my urban city faded into the distance while the road ahead led me deep into the woods. The highway thinned for the first few hours. What was once a steady stream of cars dwindled to just a handful. No one makes this trip by car from the city. They either go by train or fly. I couldn't afford either. Instead, I had to shrek my crappy two-door car all the way from the big city to a random lake in the middle of wherever the hell. But I didn't care. At this point, driving and anything I could to keep my mind off her was a welcome distraction. The scenery was pretty. The colorful trees dotted the highways as seasons were on the cusp of change. I tried to be appreciative of the nature. I always liked it. A smile cracked across my face while the sun settled behind me. Daytime always gave me hope for the future. If the sun could shine bright and high each day, then so could I. It gave me the strength to continue, but once night hit, the motivation was ripped away. I wiped tears from my weary eyes. Exhausted, starving, and needing to pee bad, I kept driving until I finally saw the sign for a rest stop. 15 more miles. I could make that. I just had to not think about going to the bathroom. After what felt like forever, the excruciating 15 miles, passing endless rows of dark trees, the small lights surrounding the rest stop finally came into view. I pulled off the desolate highway and pulled into a spot. I raced out and headed into the bathroom. The smell hit me immediately, like someone had died in there. I covered my nose and headed for the stall. As I went to the bathroom, the moonlight peered through the cracks in the bathroom. The rest stop was old and falling apart, but it served its purpose. I dared not to touch the flusher. When I proceeded to kick it with my foot, the rusted metal pipes to the toilet clanked and rattled as the water started to slowly rise instead of drain. I backpedaled away from the overflowing toilet as water cascaded down over to the dirty floor. The overhead light flickered as brown water came out of the faucet. I washed my hands as best as I could, seeing myself in the reflection of the grimy mirror and not liking what I was seeing back. Before I was about to leave, I heard loud plopping noises coming from the toilet stall. The water continued to overflow, meandering down the tiles towards the drain in the center of the floor. Plop, plop, plop. The strange sound continued to emit within the stall. I checked my watch. It was 1:43 a.m. and I still had another hour before I reached my dad's new house. A cold wind blew through the dilapidated restroom, slamming shut the front door. I nearly leapt out of my skin when the whole restroom rattled. The overhead lights flickered off, and I reached for my phone light instead as the plopping sounds continued. Stuck in the darkness, my heart began to race as I kicked open the stall. Piles of writhing, slithering black snakes slid out from the toilet, plopping down onto the muck of the floor. They were entangled in a horrid mess with each other. There had to have been at least a dozen of them, and there were more coming out of the toilet. I treaded backwards, nearly slipping on the water. I stepped out into the breezy night, horrified of the slithering mass. I was the only car in the lot, parked under a sole lamppost. The emptiness of the highway stood before me, and there she sat. An old vending machine hummed next to me, the motor struggling. I wasn't alone. A little girl with jet black hair sat facing towards the hood of my car, her long hair covering her face. I stepped forward cautiously, and the girl started to hum softly. Snip, snip, snip. I took another step towards her. The girl tossed something small over her head and it landed in the darkness. I called out to her, but she ignored me. Snip, 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 and another toss. I could smell the girl from here, sitting in her dirty white nightgown. The fear bubbled in my throat as I tried to form words as she continued to cut something. The little girl sat before me as the world seemed to be muted. The chirping of insects hushed, the slopping of snakes ceased, and the snipping sound faded. The girl slowly turned her pale face towards me, her wild eyes hidden behind strands of hair. She looked wicked. She raised her arm, clutching a bloody red pair of shears. Her other hand raised, revealing her hand, missing all of her fingers. Her middle finger hung loosely by threads of a skin and a tendon. I fell backwards, feeling the sickness rise inside of me. The girl placed her last finger in the shears and squeezed, and tossed it towards me. It rolled to my feet. She got up and started to sprint towards the woods, disappearing into the darkness. I raced after her, calling out as the misty woods swallowed me. The light from the parking lot grew more and more distant, her laughs echoing around me. The splashing in the water and the cracking of the leaves grew louder. I wasn't alone out here. I was lost, completely turned around, and the cold night was seeping into me. As I walked towards the way I thought I came, shadows in the darkness revealed themselves. The girl stepped out from behind the tree, her nightgown stained bright red as her bloody hand pointed towards me. More children began to emerge behind her, each in blood-soaked pajamas. One by one, they pointed towards me, all of their hands mutilated. Stricken with fear, I ran back through the woods, their laughs and yells roaring behind me. The light of the parking lot came into view. It was close. I leapt over branches and bushes, but one caught my leg. A hard stamp slammed into my knee as I fell face first into the muddy ground. Rolling around, grabbing my knee, the laughs grew stronger. Why were they chasing me, I wondered. I rolled to the side and was met with a white shape. A skull faced me, filled with dirt and grime, insects scurrying along the eye sockets. I looked around at where I was and the bone pile I was in. Skulls, arms, and leg bones scattered about, and I raced away, hearing their voices in their head. They were calling me, calling my name. My car was still there as I dug into my pockets for my keys, and as I pulled out of the parking lot towards the ramp, the girl stood on the edge of the darkness, pointing with her hand. I watched her in my rearview mirror until she was a tiny dot. The rest of the rest stop light came out of view. The road to the dads after that was long and grueling, and the thoughts of the children plagued my mind, their horrid hands and blood-stained pajamas. I felt sick, like I needed to call someone. But what if I had just imagined it? What if 7 hours on the road starts to play tricks on your mind? Besides, it was late, I was tired, hungry, delirious, and I tried to rationalize it. I made it to Dad's that night and kept what had happened to me by myself. I slept poorly, dreaming of the children in the forest, their little voices ringing in my head, calling out to me. My dad woke me up with the smells of coffee. He was watching the news intently as I poured my cup. Something the reporter said caught my attention. I ripped the remote from my dad's hand and put it louder. The news reporter spoke on a group of missing children that were found. The remains were found by a truck driver who stopped at the same rest stop I was at. Authorities were called and found a dozen sets of skeletons belonging to children that went missing a few weeks prior. Authorities believe this is the work of a serial-killing truck driver making his rounds through the state's killing. The knot in my stomach formed as my dad changed into the channel. I had fallen into the hole last night. My head felt light and I was taken back to the rest stop. Maybe those children weren't trying to harm me. Maybe they were trying to warn me instead. I awoke to the faint sound of sobbing in the distance. At first, my tired mind associated the sound with one of my kids, with my mind barely lingering on the edge of consciousness. But the longer I laid there, the more I started to realize how off it sounded. The sobs were too dark, more like a grown man, and they were coming from outside the house. "Can you check on the kids, please?" my wife mumbled where she lay next to me, still partially asleep. "It's not the kids," I whispered back, more annoyed than anything. Upon peeking out the window, I quickly confirmed my suspicions. As I thought, there was a man standing in the middle of the street just sobbing. Even though the ancient streetlights outside barely illuminated him, something was clearly wrong about his presence. He stood perfectly still as he sobbed, not even appearing to breathe as he let out the broken calls that shattered the silence of the night. Across the street, I could see my neighbors turn the lights on as more had clearly been awoken by the sounds of distress. "Shut up, will ya?" a man screamed from down the street, but he received no response. Though my first instinct was to check if he needed help, something about his appearance locked me in place, frozen from fear and leaving me unable to logically plan out my next move. He was tall, with only a few strands of gray hair emerging from his otherwise bald head. He was facing me, but due to the poor lighting conditions, I couldn't get a clear look at his face. About half an hour had passed before I realized that I hadn't moved an inch. I had been transfixed and only broke free once my wife woke up to ask what I was doing. "I don't know," I stuttered. "There's a man standing on our street and I think he needs help." Joanna joined my side at the window. Even in the dark, I could tell her face had completely turned pale by the mere sight of the man. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Call the police," she said with a shaky voice. "Why? What did you see?" I don't know. Just don't go outside, please," she begged. I grabbed her hand and gently pulled her away from the window. Something about the man had put us both into an undeniable state of panic, but apart from his unsettling look, there wasn't an explainable reason for the fear we felt. "Joanna, go check on the kids. I'll call the police, all right?" I half-ordered, half-asked. She nodded and basically jogged down the hallway towards our kids' room. As I dialed 911, I wondered what I could possibly say to convey the threat of a seemingly harmless man standing there just crying. Still, left without any other options, I turned to the police. 911, what's your emergency?" a woman on the other end asked. Sorry, ma'am. My name is Zach Larson. There's a man standing in the middle of the street just crying loudly. I don't know if he's drunk or what, but he's scaring the kids. I can't really say it's an emergency, but there's definitely something wrong with this man." "All right, sir. We'll send a patrol car to check it out. Can you confirm your address, please?" I confirmed my address and the conversation ended. Due to the quiet night, they estimated that a patrol car could swing by in just under 10 minutes. With that, I felt like my civic duties had been completed, and once Joanna returned to tell me the children were asleep, I calmed her down ever so slightly. After closing the blinds, the two of us headed back to bed, confident that the police would handle the situation. And I wish that was the end of the story. I truly do. But as fate would have it, things would only get worse from there. There I lay in bed, too unsettled to fall asleep. I just stared at the ever-ticking clock as an hour passed. The man kept crying, producing unrelenting sobs with each passing seconds. Then 2 hours passed, and the police had still not appeared. I even considered checking the window once again, but the mere thought of him standing there kept me from even parting the curtains. At around 4 in the morning, I had come to assume that I'd suffer through another sleepless night, but as the first rays of sunshine hit the blinds, the world around me fell dark, forcing me into a dreamless slumber. To my horror, the sob wouldn't even stop then. Hours passed while I remained in an uncomfortable state, somewhere between full consciousness and true sleep. Once I finally awoke, I was met with a little more than total darkness coming from outside. During the summer, I expected the sun to rise around 6, and since the time had been around 4 last time I checked, I knew it couldn't have been more than 30 minutes. Despite that logic, my body felt beyond broken. I was excruciatingly parched, and my bladder was on the brink of rupture. I rolled out of bed, weak and broken, still hearing the sounds of the crying man. Meanwhile, my wife still slept peacefully, seemingly unbothered by the ungodly noise. Then I picked up my phone to check the time. It read 12:03 a.m., an impossible hour considering it was 4 moments ago. I stumbled over to the window, still petrified, but determined to figure out what the hell was going on. He just stood there, unmoved since the last time I laid eyes on him. Down the road, I noticed an empty patrol car with the lights blinking, but the officers themselves were nowhere in sight. "What the hell is going on?" I mumbled to myself. As before, the sight of the man put me into a trance, one that was only broken once I heard a tiny voice coming from behind me. "Why is the man crying?" my son asked. "Alex, where's your brother?" I asked back. "He's in his room. He wet the bed," he said matter-of-factly. Stephen was only 5, but I'd assumed his bedwetting days were a thing of the past, considering the last accident had been over a year earlier. Before checking in on him, I decided to give the police another call, but before I could dial the number, I noticed the day. It was Saturday, which meant we'd been asleep for 24 hours, skipping over Friday entirely. "Alex, go back to your room. Dad has to make a call, and then I'll come check on you, all right?" In shock, I jotted the information down to a broken calendar and called the police once more. Alas, to my absolute horror, I didn't have a single bar of signal. "Oh my God, we slept through the entire day. How?" my wife called out in confusion and embarrassment. She'd just rolled over to check the time herself. "I don't know," I responded meekly. "It still doesn't make any sense. And that guy is still crying. Where's the police? The car is there, but they're just gone." As minutes went by, it dawned on me that we had actually missed an entire day. That's why Stephen had wet the bed and why my own bladder was on the verge of exploding, because we'd somehow been sedated and forced to sleep through the day, only to suffer the horrors of the night. But as a parent, we had an incredible ability to reevaluate our priorities. Regardless of the situations, we deal with our kids first, and we headed over to clean up Steven's bed, all while we tried to come up with an exit strategy. We tried out each and every phone, hopelessly calling for help, and when the phones failed, we tried the internet, which turned out to be just as futile. Try the television, Joanna finally suggested. Upon turning on the ancient device, we were met with a little more than staticky noise. It was a screen of snow mixed with barely intelligible images. Based on what we could guess, the image showed the outline of the man standing in front of the camera, overlaid by a line of text that simply read, "Come outside." "How is it doing that?" Joanna asked in a panic. "I don't know, but I'm pretty sure going outside is a fucking stupid idea," I blurted out. Sorry, I didn't mean to say it that way. Joanna and I moved to the window, ordering the kids to stay away. On the other side of the street, one of our neighbors stumbled out, seemingly disoriented. He was wielding a bat. "I'm gonna F you up," he yelled. I pulled the window open, ready to yell at him to get back inside. No sooner had our neighbor reached the crying man than the air fell into a deafening silence. A second passed, and then the sobs were replaced by a maniacal laughter that increased with intensity with each passing moment. Though we all knew the laughter came from the man, it simultaneously sounded like someone was in our house. It was the loudest thing I'd ever heard, enough to knock us to the ground in agony. "Close the window," Joanna screamed. I quickly did as she commanded, to no avail. Despite our efforts, it remained as insistent and loud as ever, and then it just stopped. "What was that?" Alex cried as Joanna grabbed both him and Steven in a tight hug. "Shh, it's okay," she said. "Just stay away from the windows." By the time I could stand up to assess the situation, our neighbor had long since vanished. All that was left was a trail of blood and guts that led up to the monster of a man who'd promptly returned to sobbing relentless. "He's gone," I let out in merely a whisper. The next hours were spent in absolute silence. All we could do was wait for sunrise and pray for a hopeful escape. We kept the television on should any news appear. Our kids, while worried, were too young to grasp the gravity of the situation, and in a way I envied them. They saw us as their ultimate guardians, able to protect them from any harm in the world, but based upon what we'd just witnessed, I didn't believe that to be true. We moved to the kitchen to grab some food, counting down each minute until daylight, but as I noticed the first orange hue appear on the horizon, I felt my legs give up beneath me, and then in less than a second, darkness enveloped me and I fell unconscious on the floor. Once again, we awoke around midnight the next night, meaning another day had come and gone. But at that time, we didn't have any phones or computers to tell us the date, as the batteries had long since died. All we had were a couple of wristwatches to tell the time. Still, the sobs persisted. It had ever gotten slightly so louder since our neighbor had gotten killed, but despite the obvious calls for distress, there wasn't a hint of sadness portrayed in his broken cries. The more we listened, the less we believed it to be human. "Let's turn on the lights, that thing's creeping me out." I flicked the switch, but nothing reacted. After futilely checking every power source in the house, including the circus, I realized that every entire neighborhood had gone dark. That's when my wife asked a question that truly caused all hope to abandon my body. Why haven't they come to help us? I didn't have a good answer, nor could I muster up any believable words of comfort. I could only do my best to protect my family from the horrific threat looming over the neighborhood until I finally myself succumbed to it. That night, we witnessed 3 more neighbors exit their homes in futile attempts at confronting the man. Each time, that sickly laughter would ring out and another friend would be dead. They didn't even resist. They just walked over without a hint of emotion, willingly meeting their agonizing demise. It wouldn't be until the 3rd night before I finally began to understand why people walked outside. We'd been forced to sleep through the light of day, only to be left without any source of light during the night, having nothing else to do but listen to the crying man. His sobs had started out as panic-inducing noises and had somehow turned sympathetic. The emotion resembled a version of Stockholm Syndrome. I wanted to go out and meet him, but I couldn't leave my family behind. "Maybe he really does need help," Joanna suggested. "I think it's time to go outside." Her words were so void of emotion, monotonous and cold. She stood up to leave, but I grabbed her before she could approach the door. The shock seemed to briefly bring her back to reality. "Think about the kids," I begged her. "They need us." My words seemed to free her from her trance, if only temporarily. I know. I don't even understand what I was thinking. I wasn't myself," she cried. But her brief lucidity wouldn't last, because as I packed away the leftovers from the previous night, I heard the front door unlock. The kids had already fallen asleep, and I knew I was about to follow suit. Still, I rushed over only to see my wife getting ready to leave. "I'm sorry," were the last words she spoke to me before she left the house. Darkness would cover my eyes before I got a chance to react. The sickening laughter would be the only sound that accompanied me as I fell into a forced slumber. By the time I awoke, Joanna was just gone. The only trace of her existence was a trail of blood glistening in the light from the street light leading up to the man. I didn't even have to call out for her. I knew she was gone. Which brings us to now. 4 days have passed since the man crying first appeared on our street. We have enough food to last another week, but I fear we'll all be gone long before then. I've seen most of my neighbors meet their demise, and only facts keeping me from doing the same are my kids, but they too have expressed a desire to go outside, and I don't know how much longer I can keep them safe. I'm documenting this as my last words before we depart the world. I've used this almost empty power bank to write this message. I don't really have any signal, but I'm hoping it somehow gets through. People need to know what happened here. If you're reading this, please send help. I don't know how much longer I can continue to resist the cries. When I was like 3 or 4, my grandmother passed away, and soon after, all of my extended family flew into town to have a funeral. A week after the funeral, some relatives were still in town, including my uncle and his family. My grandmother wanted us to sell the house after she passed, so my family did exactly that. It was hectic because we were trying to pack everything up, and meanwhile, everyone still had to go to work and school. Anyways, on one of the days that we had to pack up the house, my parents both had to work. My older cousins had school, and my uncles and aunts had jobs and other stuff. However, my uncle, my grandma's oldest son, was available to watch me for a couple hours, so he did. And according to him, I asked to go to the bathroom while he was watching TV. The closest bathroom was in my grandparents' old room, so I went in there, and when I came back, I asked my uncle who the nice lady was on the bed. He kind of played along because he thought it might have been an imaginary friend or something. He asked me questions about her to entertain me, and I described her as dark-haired, kind of white, and wearing a blue nightgown. When I said that, my uncle freaked out because my grandma always wore a light blue nightgown to sleep. After that, my uncle and I left the house and waited outside for my parents to come back. I don't really know what to think about it, but here it goes. Around 8 years ago, I was on a vacation with my parents and my cousin. My sister couldn't come because she had just started her first job, so she stayed home by herself. When we were children, both my sister and I used to be really close, because we shared a room for the first 7 or 9 years of our life. We used to have a code with taps asking for things like, "Are you ready to sleep? Are our parents asleep?" Stuff like that. She's also doing something or looking for something to do, always being the first up. So when she was up and wanted me to wake up, she would place her face as close to mine as possible and stare at me. I'm not really sure how long she would stay like this, but I clearly remember waking up to her doing this, and of course I would shout or panic until realizing it's her. And I guess it was fun for her, and I have to admit, I laugh about it now. So we're on our trip, and it's been at least 10 or 12 years since the last time my sister pulled this prank on me. My sister and I are not as close as we used to be, and we have certainly grown apart, but we still love each other. It was the last night in our trip before heading back to our city, and we just had to find this nice hotel close to pyramids and Palikue, which means no cell phone service. We were sharing a room, and my mom and dad in the first bed with my cousin and I in the other. At some point around 4 a.m., I woke up to the same old sensation that someone is staring at me, so I opened my eyes and I could clearly see a face. My immediate reaction was to shout, waking my mother up. I have to say that the sensation by itself is really scary, but years of experience with my sister waking up like this make it take the threat away. So despite the shouting, I wasn't scared, I just wasn't too familiar with what was going on. My mom turned on the light and asked me what happened, and I told her I was pretty sure my sister had just woken me up. I know it didn't make any sense, but I felt it was her. I can't say I saw her face, I just saw a face and then it mysteriously disappeared. My mom is really superstitious because she couldn't sleep after that because she felt something was odd, and I couldn't sleep because I was thinking about my sister. Later in the morning, we noticed we all had lots of missed calls. My sister had been involved in a really bad car accident. Luckily, she only had minor injuries. To this day, I don't know what to make out of this experience. My brain tells me it was just a coincidence. On the other hand, it's the only way I would have thought of my sister sleeping. It was just so real between both of us. Anyways, guys, I think that's gonna do it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, I would appreciate you taking a second to press the like button. Let me know what you thought in the comment section down below. If you guys do really like these scary story videos and you want more of them, commenting, liking is the best way to just let me know. If they do better, I'll make more. But yeah, other than that, if you want to help me out, you can use code SCRUBBY at the G Fuel checkout. My podcast, The Scuffed Cast, is down below. You can also get some of the merch, which can also be found in the description down there. But yeah, on that note, guys, I think that'll do it for the video. Don't get anyone pregnant. If you do, make sure they're hot, and I'll see you guys next time. I'm out. Peace.